A baby was left to die by the roadside, and the men everyone feared, the Riverside Kings, became his only hope. But behind the sheriff's polished badge hid the same corruption that had driven his mother to run. Years later, that abandoned child returned as a man with proof, courage, and a plan to bring the truth to light. And when justice finally roared louder than deceit, the town learned what real redemption looks like.
The afternoon heat shimmered above Highway 41, turning the asphalt into a wavering river of light. The roar of engines echoed through the emptiness, 6 bikes slicing the horizon, their riders leather-clad and road-weary. The men were on their way back from a charity run, just looking for a cold drink and a quiet stretch of road. Then came a sound that didn't belong there, a faint, thin cry, almost swallowed by the wind. Mason Gravel Tate was the first to hear it. He slowed, lifted a hand, and the rest of the group fell silent, engines idling down to a low growl. The cry came again, soft but desperate, carried on the breeze from a ditch beside the highway sign. Gravel swung his leg off his Harley, boots crunching the gravel shoulder. "You hear that?" he muttered. Doc, the medic of the group, frowned. "Sounds like, nah, that can't be." They followed the sound to a patch of tall grass by a rusted fence post. There, half hidden in an old motel towel, was a baby, red-faced, wriggling, tiny fists waving against the heat. A half-empty bottle set nearby, tipped into the dust. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. These were men used to oil and metal, not something this fragile. The air felt heavier somehow, as if the world itself had gone still to watch what they do. Gravel crouched down. He was a big man, broad shoulders, sun-cut face, hands scarred from years of repair work and road fights. But his touch was steady and careful. He pulled off his bandana and wrapped the child tighter, shielding him from the glare. "Hey, little man," he whispered, the gruffness gone from his voice. "You picked a tough place to start your ride." A passing pickup slowed. The driver stared, shook his head, and muttered something about bikers and trouble. Gravel caught the look but didn't care. He'd seen that judgment his whole life. People saw the tattoos, the jackets, the noise, and forgot there were hearts under the leather. He looked at his brothers. "Call it in," he said quietly. Doc pulled out his phone and dialed. The others stood guard, shading the baby from the sun, their engines rumbling like restless animals. 10 minutes later, a county patrol car pulled up, dust curling around its tires. Deputy Ray Doyle stepped out, clean uniform, mirrored sunglasses, a practiced smirk. He looked at the men, then at the baby. "Well," he said, voice dripping with irony, "this is a picture, isn't it? A biker gang babysitting." Gravel straightened up, still holding the child. "We found him on the side of the road," he said calmly. "You gonna help or just talk?" Doyle's eyes flicked to the Riverside Kings patch on Gravel's vest. "You know," he said, "some folks might think you had something to do with this. Maybe the kid's better off with the state than with a pack of felons." The words hit like gravel in a wound. Gravel took a step forward, slow and deliberate, the baby still resting against his chest. The wind carried the faint sound of the child's breathing. "You listen here," he said softly. "We don't hurt what's helpless. You do your job, we'll do ours." Something in his voice made Doyle hesitate. After a moment, the deputy radioed for child services, muttering under his breath. But Gravel didn't hear him. He was looking down at the infant, whose tiny fingers had curled around one of his, gripping it with impossible strength. The road stretched endless and empty behind him. The air smelled of dust and gasoline. Gravel didn't know what would happen next, who the child was, where he came from, or why the world had left him there. All he knew was the quiet weight in his arms and the spark of something rare, a reason to stay steady, to do right, no matter what people thought. He looked at his crew, Doc, Jesse, Travis, and the rest, and said, "We'll figure this out. He's one of us now." And for the first time that day, The engines roared, not out of anger or rebellion, but out of promise.
The state named him Caleb Tate. The men who found him called him Rook. They said he earned it, small but sharp, curious, and stubborn enough to stand his ground even before he could walk. The nickname stuck, stitched into the leather patch on his tiny denim vest long before he learned how to write it. The Riverside Kings weren't what most folks imagined when they heard motorcycle club. Their clubhouse smelled more like baby powder and engine oil than anything wild. Bottles clanked beside spark plugs, and the jukebox had been quiet for months. They took turns on night duty, one man feeding, another rocking, another fixing the old heater to keep the cold off the crib they'd built from a shipping pallet. There were no wives, no nannies, just men who'd spent their lives fixing broken machines, trying to learn how to care for something fragile. Gravel was the anchor. The others followed his lead because they knew he wasn't chasing redemption, he was chasing balance. Years earlier, he'd lost his own little boy to a custody battle that ended in a courtroom instead of a compromise. That wound never closed. But Holden Rook steadied him. Maybe he couldn't go back and fix his own past, but he could give this kid a better start. Travis Doc Heller took charge of the medical side. He'd once dreamed of being a pediatrician before tuition debt and family loss derailed it all. Now, his steady hands kept a worn notebook filled with every ounce and inch Rook gained, every vaccination date, every fever. He used a grease-stained kitchen scale to weigh the baby and smiled every time the number crept higher. Jesse Lane, the quietest of them all, was the one who built Rook's first tricycle from old BMX parts and scrap aluminum. Balance, he'd say, setting Rook on the seat while Gravel held the handlebars. You fall, you get up. That's the rule. Rook didn't just learn to ride early. He learned to trust that someone would always help him back up. But not everyone saw it that way. Deputy Ray Doyle had been watching them since that day on the highway. By the time Rook turned 2, Doyle was running for county sheriff and needed a villain to campaign against. The Kings made perfect targets, men with records, tattoos, and no wives to soften their image. He didn't need truth, he needed headlines. So the citations began. Noise complaints, loitering charges, anonymous tips that the bikers had a baby at their clubhouse. When journalists came sniffing around, Doyle gave careful half-smiles and said things like, "We just want to make sure every child's in a safe environment." And people believed him. At school, Rook's tiny leather vest made teachers frown and parents whisper. A child raised by bikers was a curiosity, sometimes even a warning. Yet the boy never showed fear. He'd grin wide, scuff shoes tapping against the floor, and talk about how his uncles fixed bikes and taught him about engines and honesty, two things that didn't lie if you treated them right. The Kings didn't respond to the gossip. They just kept showing up. They built wheelchair ramps for the town library, repaired old trucks for single parents, and donated to every charity ride within 50 miles. But Doyle's shadow followed them everywhere, twisting their kindness into rumor. Then, one evening, on Rook's 8th birthday, everything shifted. The clubhouse was quiet after the laughter died down. Balloons sagged against the ceiling fan, and Rook had fallen asleep on Gravel's shoulder, crumbs of cake still on his chin. That's when Jesse noticed something at the gate, a small brown envelope propped against the post, sealed with tape. Gravel tore it open. Inside were 3 things: a hospital wristband from the county hospital, a small silver locket with a photo of a teenage girl, and a folded note that smelled faintly of salt and sunscreen. The handwriting was rushed but careful. I had to leave him. I was running from the man who promised to hurt us both. Keep him safe. His name is Caleb. Lila. The room fell silent. Even the ticking of the clock seemed louder than before. Doc examined the wristband under the lamp. The date matched Rook's birth record. "It's real," he said quietly. "This isn't abandonment. It's escape." Gravel held the locket in his palm. The girl inside looked no younger than 17. Tired eyes, sunburnt shoulders, a faint smile. Whoever she was, she hadn't left out of neglect. She'd left out of love. For the first time, the Kings didn't just feel responsible, they felt chosen. Gravel placed the locket around Rook's neck while he slept. Your mom fought to save you. Now, we'll fight to keep you safe. Outside, the night air carried the hum of crickets and the faraway growl of engines on the highway. Somewhere out there, a story was still unfinished, but inside the clubhouse, surrounded by chrome and milk bottles, the Riverside Kings had made a silent promise. Whatever storms came next, they'd face them together.
By 17, Rook looked like a man the world couldn't push around. Broad shoulders, calm eyes, and a kind of quiet that made people listen, even when he said nothing. He'd learned early that talking too much got you nowhere. It was better to watch, to measure, to wait. Gravel used to say, "The road teaches patience. You rush it, it throws you." Rook took that lesson to heart. The Riverside Kings were still running smooth back then. Their rules were simple. No weapons, no shady deals, no backroom shortcuts. They fixed cars, restored bikes, and led charity rides for the local food bank. Gravel believed that even men with grease on their hands could build something decent, something that gave them pride instead of trouble. For a while, it worked. But good things have a way of attracting temptation. Rick Sable McCready, Gravel's vice president, wasn't as patient. He had charm, the kind that made people lean in, and a knack for promising the world if you just looked the other way. He started talking about investors and opportunities. He called them sponsors, but everyone knew what that meant. Quicker money, fewer questions. He said the Kings didn't need to struggle fixing flat tires when they could be managing deals. "The world already thinks we're criminals," Sable said one night, standing under the flickering bar light. "Might as well get paid like ones." Gravel slammed his beer down hard enough to spill foam across the counter. "That's not who we are," he said. "We build, we don't break." The room split. Half nodded with Gravel, the rest with Sable. Rook sat in the corner, jaw tight, feeling the air thicken. He wanted to speak, to back Gravel, to defend what they'd built, but he was still just a kid the club had raised. His patch carried history, but not weight. He stayed silent, learning the hardest part of leadership, knowing when no one's ready to hear you yet. Weeks later, tension hit asphalt. It was supposed to be a good day, a food drive ride to support a local shelter. The Kings rode out in formation, chrome flashing under the noon sun, trailers filled with canned goods and warm clothes. But just before they reached town, the blue lights came. Patrol cars blocked both ends of the road, dust curling around their tires. Deputy Ray Doyle stepped out like a man walking onto a stage. He wore the same mirrored shades, the same smirk. "Boys," he said, "looks like we've got a paperwork issue." Behind him, tow trucks rolled up. One by one, bikes were hooked and hauled away, while cameras clicked from a distance. The local news caught every frame, the dust, the confusion, Doyle's smug wave as he told reporters that the Riverside Kings continue to pose a threat under the disguise of charity. That night, the 6 o'clock broadcast made them look exactly like the villains Doyle had been promising to clean up. Gravel's fury was quiet but heavy, like thunder behind clouds. He threw his patched vest across the room. Sable stormed out, swearing the club was wasting its potential. The others shouted, argued, turned on one another. Rook watched it all, the brotherhood that raised him cracking apart like safety glass under pressure. He saw in that moment how easily good men could turn against each other when pride and fear mixed. The next morning, Rook packed his duffel and left. No drama, no goodbyes, just a note on the counter. "I'll be back when I can help for real." He rode south, following the long desert highway until the skyline of Phoenix rose out of the heat. He took a union job at a freight yard, long shifts, honest work, the kind that left your muscles sore but your conscience clean. At night, he took classes in logistics and business law. He learned the side of leadership that Gravel never had the time or papers for. How to read contracts, how to trace funding, how to build something the right way, on paper, not just on principle. He still wore the locket beneath his shirt. Sometimes, during lunch breaks, he'd thumb it open and stare at the photo of the young woman with sunburned shoulders and soft eyes. Lila, the woman who chose to trust strangers on the side of the highway more than the man chasing her. That trust became his compass. Years passed in the hum of forklifts and the rhythm of city life. Rook didn't keep in touch often, but rumors found him anyway. Gravel's health was fading, his heart weaker by the month. Sable had taken over most operations and was modernizing the Kings, code for cutting corners. And Doyle? He'd climbed the ladder. His campaign posters were everywhere, smiling from billboards with the slogan, "Law, Order, and Loyalty." The same man who'd once sneered at a baby wrapped in a towel was now preaching family values to anyone who'd listen. Rook didn't say much about it. He just kept working, learning, saving. But every now and then, he'd hear a line from a TV broadcast or an old biker he'd ran into at a gas station, and something in his chest would tighten. The contempt that had once followed him since birth, the looks, the whispers, the headlines, had grown sharper. It had teeth now, and it was biting into the only family he'd ever known. Then one evening, years later, his phone buzzed. The number was familiar but shaky, as if the signal itself carried the weight of time. He answered, and a voice rasped through the static. Gravel's voice, older, weaker, but still steady at its core. "Come home, son. It's time." Rook stared out at the sunset over the rail yard, streaks of orange burning across the metal stacks. He didn't hesitate. He packed his duffel, tightened the straps on his bike, and started the engine. The road ahead was long and empty, but his purpose was clear. This time, he wasn't just coming home, he was coming back with a plan.
The sun was already bleeding into the horizon when Rook rode back into Riverside. His bike was quiet, no chrome shine, no roaring pipes, just a steady, low rumble that turned heads along Main Street. He passed storefronts that looked older, smaller, and a town that felt like it had changed without permission. The last time he'd been here, hope still lived in the cracks. Now it looked like someone had painted over it. The clubhouse stood at the edge of town, where the road met the riverbank. Once it had been a place of laughter and long nights fixing engines under yellow light. Now it looked like a showroom. New chrome railings, polished floors, people he didn't recognize handling cash at the bar. The smell of gasoline had been replaced by cologne and cold smoke. Gravel was waiting for him out back, thinner and paler than Rook remembered. The old man's shoulders still squared out of habit, but his hands trembled when he tried to hide the fatigue. He pulled Rook into a hug that felt like memory itself, strong for a second, then fragile. "They're not us anymore," he whispered. "They forgot what it meant." Rook said nothing. He'd learned long ago that silence sometimes spoke louder than anger. Listening twice. He didn't rush in to fix things. He did what Gravel had taught him years ago. Listen twice, speak once. For days, he stayed quiet, sitting in meetings, watching faces, catching details in conversations most ignored. What he found made his stomach tighten. The investors Sable bragged about were no sponsors at all. They were fronts, shell companies tied to resale operations that danced on the edge of the law. Expensive bikes came in for repair and left with swapped serial numbers. Charity events had real donations, but half the funds vanished before reaching their causes. On paper, everything looked legitimate. In truth, they were walking a line that could crumble beneath them at any moment. Sable didn't seem worried. He liked being the man in charge, liked the money flowing in, liked seeing the Kings look powerful again. "It's business," he told the crew one night, flashing his easy smile. "The world's built on deals, not feelings. We're just playing the same game as everyone else." But Rook saw through it. He saw how Sable laughed with new recruits who barely knew what the club once stood for. He saw how Doyle, now wearing the sheriff's badge, made public raids that caught low-level runners but never touched the top. Every time Sable's books got audited, Doyle's men found nothing relevant. Every time Doyle faced election pressure, he'd raid one of Sable's fake fronts and look like a hero. It wasn't rivalry anymore. It was partnership. Corruption dressed as order. Digging up the past. Rook needed proof, so he went digging. Doc helped him. Older now, his hair flecked with gray, but his focus still razor sharp. They spent nights at the county records office, pulling files that hadn't been opened in years. Most of them were ordinary: tax reports, property deeds, business permits. But one file changed everything. A sealed case. A name he knew by heart. Lila Moore. The restraining order had been marked closed due to insufficient evidence. The details were faint, blurred by time, but the initials of the man she'd filed against, R.D., stared back like a ghost through the paper. The dates lined up exactly, with the week baby Caleb had been left on the highway. The name of the accused had been blacked out, but Rook didn't stop there. In a box marked miscellaneous, unshredded, he found the case's original cover sheet, half torn, never properly destroyed. It carried the hospital stamp and a photograph. A teenage girl, bruised, exhausted, holding a newborn against her chest. Lila. The duty log listed only one deputy assigned to that case. Ray Doyle. Rook didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The truth hit him like cold air in his lungs. The man who'd called them criminals had been the very reason Lila ran. The system hadn't failed her. It had erased her. The table turns. When Rook walked back into the clubhouse that night, it felt like the floor itself carried a charge. Sable was holding court at the long table, laughing with the new faces, counting envelopes like a banker. Gravel sat at the edge, watching the club he'd built turn into something unrecognizable. Rook laid his phone on the table and slid it forward. Photos lit up the screen. Invoices, wire transfers, shell companies, and campaign donations that all pointed one way. From Sable's investors to Doyle's campaign treasurer. Every dollar left a trail. Sable leaned back, smirking. "You've been busy, kid, still playing detective." Rook didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He said evenly, "You're making us into what he says we are. Every deal you take, every shortcut you justify, it feeds his campaign. You hand him the headline, he hands you protection. That's not leadership. That's surrender." Laughter rippled down the table, uneasy but defiant. Sable's grin didn't reach his eyes. "You don't understand how the world works." "I understand better than you think," Rook said, sliding the phone closer. "You forgot who we were supposed to be." The room went still. Then Sable's hand twitched toward his waistband. Instinct, pride, panic, maybe all three. Half the room shifted with him. Gravel stood up too quickly, one hand to his chest, breathing hard. But before anyone could move further, Rook reached for the old gavel sitting in front of him, the one used to open every club meeting since the Kings began. He lifted it once and let it hit the table with a heavy crack that silenced the room. "Put it to a vote," he said. His voice was calm but steady as steel. "Old bylaws, no side money, no dirty deals. You said we were a family. Let's find out." No one spoke. The sound of the river outside filled the silence. And for the first time in years, the Riverside Kings were forced to look at themselves. Not the shine, not the swagger, but the truth underneath.
It didn't end with shouting or fights or flashing lights. It ended with paperwork, late nights, and quiet determination. Rook spent the next week rebuilding the Kings from the inside out. No speeches, no drama, just action. He opened every record, posted every ride schedule, and put their financials online for anyone to see.
Reporters who once chased scandal were now invited in to film the truth. Transparency, Rook said, is the best kind of armor. He called the state charity board before Doyle could twist the narrative, personally handing over all receipts and donation logs. Then he met with the district prosecutor, not to beg, but to bargain. He offered ledgers, invoices, and proof of corruption in exchange for one thing: immunity for any kings willing to step forward and testify against the ones who'd turned the club rotten. By Friday, the deal was sealed. Saturday was the ride. The ride for redemption. Morning came cold and silver. The sky looked like cut steel, sharp and clear. Dozens of engines started one by one until the air thrummed with life. The Riverside Kings formed a line that stretched from the river bridge to Main Street. No colors flying high, no bluster, just a formation of men trying to set things right. Rook rode at the front. Gravel was beside him, older now, face pale but proud. Behind them rode Doc, his medical bag strapped to the side of his bike, and Jesse, balancing a crate of brand-new helmets for the kids' safety drive later that day. Every mile of that ride felt heavier than any before, not from fear, but from meaning. When they pulled up to the courthouse, the whole town was there. Cameras, reporters, people who once crossed the street when they saw the Kings coming. And among them stood Lila Moore. She was older, but her eyes, the same fierce, clear eyes from the locket, hadn't changed. She held her hands together, trembling, while a public advocate stood beside her. The news crews turned as she began to speak, voice low but unwavering. She told them everything. About the night she ran, about the fear that chased her, about the deputy who cornered her in her own kitchen and whispered that no one would ever believe her over a man in uniform. She told them about the baby she left on the roadside, the one she'd prayed would be found by someone kinder than the law that had failed her. Her words spread through Riverside like a brush fire, unstoppable, undeniable. Justice on the steps. By noon, the courthouse was surrounded. The state prosecutor stepped forward with a folder thick with evidence, money trails, fake raids, and falsified reports. Ray Doyle, now Sheriff Doyle, tried to keep his composure as cameras turned his way. But it was too late. A junior deputy had come forward, tired of covering for him. Text messages, financial logs, and raid schedules all connected Doyle's office to Sable's operations. Every deal, every confiscation had been part of a quiet trade, image for loyalty, silence for power. When the arrest warrants were read, Sable bolted for his bike. Half the Kings didn't follow. The other half stayed, heads held high as the bylaws vote was finalized. Unanimous. The old code was restored. No dirty money, no false alliances, no lies. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, but Rook didn't flinch. He stood beside Gravel as the sheriff was led away in front of the very courthouse he used to command. Doyle tried to smirk for the cameras, tried to speak, but this time no one listened. The town he once controlled finally saw through him. Gravel reached into his vest pocket, pulled out the president's patch, the same one he'd worn since before Rook could walk, and placed it in his son's hand. "Take it," he said softly. His voice was thin but certain. "Lead them somewhere I can't." A new road. Rook didn't celebrate. There were no cheers, no headlines calling him a hero. Instead, he went back to the clubhouse, scrubbed it clean, painted the walls, opened the doors to the public. He turned their charity rides into community events, invited kids to learn bike safety, and started mentorship programs for youth who needed a place to belong. Triumph didn't look like fireworks. It looked like hard work done right. It looked like Rook riding a slow, steady circle at the annual toy run, handing a helmet to a wide-eyed little boy, who stared at the vests with wonder instead of fear. It looked like townsfolk waving instead of locking their doors. Admiration came quietly, from the same people who once rolled up their windows at stoplights when the Kings passed by. Now they brought their kids to meet them. The road's promise.
Years later, when the dust of all that history had settled, Rook rode past the same stretch of Highway 41 where it had all begun. The wind still smelled of sunburned grass and hot asphalt. He stopped for a moment, turned off the engine, and listened. It was quiet. Not empty, just peaceful. He thought of the men who'd raised him, the road that had shaped him, and the mother who'd given him a second chance by trusting strangers. Then he saw her again, Lila, standing on the courthouse steps, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes still holding that quiet fire. Rook touched the locket at his chest, her locket, now his, the symbol of everything that had nearly broken but somehow held together. He smiled. The road doesn't forgive, it doesn't forget. But sometimes, if you ride long enough, it makes room for you anyway. And that day, the boy who'd once been found crying by the side of the road rode at the head of the pack. A leader made not from anger or rebellion, but from the courage to rebuild what others had destroyed. A family, reborn from contempt, had finally found respect.